Where are the men of God who are bold and who stand up and say, no, eternity depends on this?
Every generation of believers in the church has had to fight for the purity and the exclusivity of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Beginning in the 1st and 2nd centuries, Clement of Rome, Ignatius, and Justin Martyr gave their own lives unto death to preserve and to protect the purity of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Irenaeus fought Gnosticism in the 2nd century, and Polycarp fought the Roman proconsul in the 2nd century at the cost of his own life. Cyprian fought apostasy in the 3rd century and was sentenced to die for the gospel. He removed his garments, he knelt down, and only said, "Thanks be to God." Athanasius fought Arianism in the 4th century, which denied the deity of Christ and thus was a frontal attack against the gospel of Jesus Christ. Athanasius was unmoved, and he stood contra mundum, against the world. He was willing to be one man, willing to stand for the gospel in the face of the entire world. Augustine warred against Pelagius and his denial of the fall of the human race in Adam and its only rescue by sovereign grace. Augustine took it head on. John Wycliffe, John Huss, Martin Luther attacked the perverted gospel of the Roman Catholic Church with its corrupt system of human works and merit. John Calvin fired volley after volley against Rome and its foul gospel, as well as against the libertines and against the Unitarians and all other attacks against the gospel. In subsequent generations, Christian leaders continued to pay the ultimate price in their hour of history to preserve and to protect the exclusivity of the gospel of Jesus Christ. John Rogers and the Marian martyrs, 284 of them in all, fought against the Roman Catholic Church over the nature of the Lord's Supper, which was in reality a fight over the nature of the purity of the gospel itself. Thomas Cranmer, Nicholas Ridley, Hugh Latimer were burned at the stake at Oxford for the purity of the gospel. As you know, Ridley and Latimer were fastened to the same stake, and Latimer asserted to Ridley, "Play the man, Ridley. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England as I trust shall never be put out." 6 months earlier, Cranmer was bodily and physically removed from his pulpit and taken directly to the martyr's stake, and there he gave his life to uphold the standard of sound words. And when the gospel was all but silenced in the Church of England, George Whitefield took to the open air and went out into the highways and into the open fields and lifted up his voice and said, "I've come here today to talk to you about your soul," and preached the gospel to the multitudes. Archibald Nettleton fought for the gospel against Charles Finney. Charles Spurgeon fought the downgrade controversy over the message and the method of the gospel. And so it goes in every generation.
Well, almost. Not so much these days. Visit, dare I say, most Protestant churches, and you will if you were an alien, and you were brought in from another planet, and you attended most Protestant worship services on any given Sunday, what would your impression of God be based on that service? Now, in fairness, in some of the mainline Protestant denominations, because of the liturgy that has been repeated now for decades, maybe even centuries, there is a remnant of some good theology there. But I suspect if you listen to the homily, the preaching would indicate they don't worship much of a God. He certainly is not an exclusive God. He seems to be more like a beggar God who exists just to help people. What was just being described by Steve Lawson, great men who have come up through the ages and have said, no, stop, wrong, and been willing to die for it. How many of those men do we have today? There are some. There are indeed some. The majority of men these days, quite honestly, well, here's what I'm trying to say. We could use a couple of John Knox's.
John Knox, a Roman Catholic priest in Scotland, converted by the power of the gospel, became a bodyguard of George Wishart. Wishart was martyred. The ministry fell to Knox. He began to preach in St. Andrew's Castle. He was captured by a French ship, served in the hull of that ship for the next 19 months, a captive of war, was released, came back to Scotland and preached the gospel. Bloody Mary took the throne. He fled Scotland, went to Geneva. He returns to Scotland after Bloody Mary has been removed from the throne. Mary, Queen of Scots, who has been in exile in France, now ascends the throne in Scotland. On her very first Sunday as Queen of Scotland, she goes into the privacy of her own chapel. And Mary, Queen of Scots, a practicing Roman Catholic, one who holds to a different gospel, received private Mass. Word came to John Knox, and the very next Sunday, Knox ascends to the pulpit. He calls out Mary, Queen of Scots, and he says from the pulpit, one Mass is more fearful to me than if 10,000 armed enemies were landed in any part of this realm. Knox said, I have learned plainly and boldly to call wickedness by its own terms. I call a fig and a spade a spade. When word reached Mary, Queen of Scots, she was infuriated. She summoned Knox to appear before her, to give an account to her. Knox came in. She took the offensive. She launched with 3 indictments and charges to be brought against John Knox, and it deflected off of him like water off a duck's back. And Knox, not to mince words, declared to her the idolatry of the Mass could have no place in Scotland. It would invite the judgment of God upon this nation. Knox was unrelenting in preaching to her the one true, pure, saving gospel of grace in the Lord Jesus Christ, and she was reduced to a puddle of tears. Knox said she began to howl like a wounded animal. The cause of the Reformation in Scotland turned as a result of these 6 encounters between the thundering Scot John Knox and Mary, Queen of Scots.
You know, I'm for everybody. You may not agree with me, but to me, it's not my job to try to straighten everybody out. I don't have it in my heart to condemn people. I'm there to encourage them. I see myself more as a coach, as a motivator, to help them, experience the life God has for us.